For our reading this morning, I'm going to tell a story rather than actually read one. In the Hindu tradition, many of our oldest stories, they are written down in Scripture, but before they were written down and encoded in Scripture, they were oral traditions. And so the oldest of our stories were passed on from family to family, from generation to generation, orally. And it's in that tradition that I'm going to share with you the story of Ganesh, which I didn't get into with the kids, but I want to get into in greater depth with you now. As you noticed as I was explaining to the kids, the god Ganesh has the head of an elephant, but it's not the size of an actual elephant's head. If you'll notice, it's in proportion with his torso. So a couple of questions arise, naturally out of this. How do you first wind up with a god that has an elephant head, and how is it not a proper elephant's head? I had these questions, and most children in India notice the god Ganesh straight away. Out of the hundreds of gods that may exist, Ganesh just really draws in kids because of how unusual he is. And a common question that younger kids will ask is, how did Ganesh come to exist? And so I was no different in asking that question when I was younger, and was told the story. And in India, it is considered a children's story. So it's not surprising for me to say that it's one that I've held dearly in my own life since I was young. Ganesh has a mom and a dad. His dad's name is Shiva. His mom's name is Parvati. Shiva is one of the main primary gods in Hinduism. You could even say top 3. And his wife Parvati is a mother goddess type figure, also very, very prominent. As male gods are sometimes wont to do in ancient stories, he went off to fight demons and conquer foreign lands or whatever it was he was doing, save the cosmos. And he was gone for eons. He was gone for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And he left Parvati sitting around at home, all by herself. And she did not have anyone to keep her company. So after all of this waiting and waiting and waiting, she went one day down to the riverbank to take her daily bath. And using the mud and the clay on the side of the riverbank, she fashioned a child out of the mud, out of the clay. And she breathed, as Mother Goddess, she breathed life into this clay, into the dirt. And thus was born her son, Ganesh. Ganesh was a great friend, a good companion. He loved his mom loved him. And he took good care of her, and one of his duties was that when she went for her morning bath at the river, he would stand some ways away on the path that led to the river and make sure nobody walked by, nobody could see her inappropriately. And it was on such a morning when Parvati instructed her son to stand on the path and make sure that no one went down to the river and saw her disrobed, that Dad reappeared. Shiva reappeared after all this time away, saving the cosmos, destroying demons, etc. He reappears, and he encounters this boy. Of course, he has no idea who this boy is. He has no idea that this is his son. So he sees this boy, and the boy says, "Halt, you can't go any further. You're absolutely not allowed to go any further." And Shiva says, "Who are you to stop me from going anywhere?" He says, "Well, I'm not letting you go. That's my instructions. I'm not allowed to let anybody go." And Shiva says, "I'm giving you about 10 seconds to move, or else that's it." And he says, "Well, I'm not moving. I'm staying right here, and no one's allowed to pass me." And Shiva, in a fit of anger, chops off Ganesh's head and leaves the corpse there. He continues on down to the river edge and finds his wife Parvati, and he starts to tell her, "You wouldn't believe this ornery kid was there trying to stop me from coming down the path to see you. I took care of him." And Parvati's shocked. She said, "What did you do?" He says, "Well, I beheaded him. I cut his head off. He's dead now. Nothing to worry about." And Parvati says, "That was our son. We had a son while you were away. I created a son." And she's mad, she's sad, all at the same time. She's really upset. And in order to allay her, in order to placate her, Shiva says, all right, I'll fix it. I'll make everything okay. And he goes back into the edge of the forest and he draws a line in the dirt. And he says, the first thing to come by, the first being to come by, I will give its head to our son and give it life again. And thus we'll have Ganesh once more in our lives. The first being to cross this line was not a person. It wound up being a baby elephant. And so Shiva, in his second act of beheading, beheads the baby elephant and places the baby elephant's head on the torso of Ganesh and brings him back to life. And thus we have Ganesh as he exists here and now. Ganesh has a small elephant head is because it's the head of a baby elephant on a human torso. And I'll offer a few minutes of silence for us to just think about this sacred story. It's a very ancient and sacred story in the Hindu tradition, and I'll share a few more words about it. As I mentioned, this story of Ganesh in India is a children's story. It's even a beloved children's story, and one I grew up with. And as such, it wouldn't surprise you to hear that some years ago, I was interviewing for the position of Director of Religious Education at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Marblehead, Massachusetts. And as part of the interview process, as one of the semifinalists, you had to prepare a children's worship service with the interview committee being the kids. And you'd prepare this worship service and lead it. You'd lead the committee in worship, in a children's worship service, and that was the final stage. It was the final step of the interview process. So I was very excited. I brought a statue, a different one, not this one. I brought a statue of Ganesh. I created an altar table, and I began by, did some centering opening words, and then I told the story of Ganesh. And I shared how it's an important sacred story in the Indian tradition, how it speaks of family and other values like that. And as I finished up, there was total silence on the part of the interview committee. And finally, one of them said to me, well, we really like you, and we want you as our director of religious education, but will you promise us you'll never tell that story to our kids? And I was really confused. I said, why? Why not? What's wrong with the story? Well, let's see, 2 beheadings, murder of a father murdering his own son to start with. It just has a couple of problems there. Slaughter of a baby animal. It was fascinating. In the Indian context, this story is not understood as being overly violent and inappropriate for kids. It just isn't. And yet here in our American context, and it was so clear to me when they pointed it out, it was so clear to me that it wouldn't work. Definitely not in a UU context and probably not most contexts.